Imagine a crisp New England morning, the air filled not with the promise of a new day, but with the chilling finality of death. We often think of colonial America through a romanticized lens, a land of new beginnings and rugged individualism. But beneath this veneer lies a much darker, more brutal reality. When we hear about mass executions in early America, our minds immediately jump to the infamous Salem witch trials of 1692. But what if I told you that decades earlier, a far more somber event took place, one that set a grim precedent for justice in the New World? This is the story of America's first mass execution, a forgotten chapter that reveals the deep-seated fears and harsh beliefs that shaped the nation. It's a tale of religious fervor, social control, and the tragic consequences of a justice system built on fear. To understand this event, we have to step back into the world of the 17th century Puritans. For them, life was a constant spiritual battle between good and evil. They had crossed a vast ocean to build a city upon a hill, a model society dedicated to God. In this rigid world, the lines between church and state were almost non-existent. The community's survival, both physically and spiritually, depended on absolute adherence to God's laws as they interpreted them. Sin was not just a personal failing. It was a crack in the foundation of their entire society, an invitation for divine punishment in the form of failed crops, disease, or attacks. Therefore, crime was seen as a direct affront to God, and the punishments were designed not just to penalize the individual, but to purify the entire community. Public punishment was a powerful tool in the Puritan arsenal. The stocks, the pillory, the whipping post, these weren't hidden away. They were placed in the center of town for all to see. Humiliation was a key part of the sentence. A person locked in the stocks wasn't just uncomfortable. They were a living sermon, a public spectacle of the consequences of straying from the path. Executions were the ultimate public lesson. They were meticulously planned community events. On the day of a hanging, the entire town would gather. Schools and businesses would close. A procession would lead the condemned from the jail to the gallows, often with ministers walking alongside, urging them to confess and save their soul. Before the final act, there would be a long sermon, sometimes lasting for hours. The minister would use the condemned as a living example, warning the crowd of the dangers of sin and the certainty of God's judgment. The execution itself was a solemn, terrifying ritual designed to strike fear into the hearts of everyone watching. It was a clear and brutal message. This is the fate that awaits those who defy our laws and our God. This system wasn't just about justice, it was about control. It was a way to maintain order in a small, isolated community, living on the edge of a vast, unknown wilderness, a wilderness they believed was home to both physical and spiritual dangers. Now, let's journey back to the year 1648 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This was a time of tension and uncertainty. The colony was still finding its footing, and anxieties were high. In this climate, a series of disturbing events unfolded. A number of colonists confessed to what the Puritan authorities considered heinous, unspeakable crimes, acts of bestiality. For the Puritans, this was not simply a crime. It was a profound violation of the natural order established by God. It was a sign of deep corruption that threatened the very soul of their holy experiment. The Bible, specifically Leviticus, was explicit. Both the person and the animal involved were to be put to death. There was no room for interpretation or mercy. The authorities rounded up the accused. We don't know the exact details of their trials, as many records have been lost. But we can imagine the scene. Men standing before a grim-faced panel of magistrates and ministers. Their fates already sealed by their own confessions, likely extracted under immense psychological pressure. In the Puritan worldview, a confession was paramount. It was seen as the first step toward repentance, even if earthly salvation was impossible. On a single day in 1648, several individuals, the exact number is debated by historians, but it was at least 4, and possibly more, were led to the gallows. Alongside them, the animals involved in their confessed crimes were also killed, a literal interpretation of the biblical command. This grim event marks what many historians consider to be the first mass execution in the American colonies. Unlike the Salem witch trials, which would later be condemned as a tragic miscarriage of justice, this event was seen at the time as a righteous and necessary act. It was the system working exactly as intended. The community believed it was purging itself of a terrible sin, restoring its covenant with God. The governor at the time, John Winthrop, recorded the events in his journal not with horror, but with a sense of solemn duty fulfilled. He saw it as a painful but essential cleansing. a way to protect the colony from God's wrath. This reveals the chilling logic of fear-based justice. When survival is believed to depend on absolute purity, extreme measures are not just accepted, they are demanded. There was no public outcry, no questioning of the verdict. There was only the quiet, grim acceptance that this was the price of maintaining their city upon a hill. So why has this story been largely forgotten? Why do we remember Salem but not this earlier, equally grim episode? Part of the reason is the nature of the crime itself. The accusations in Salem witchcraft, spectral evidence, pacts with the devil are dramatic and have captured the public imagination for centuries. The crimes of 1648, however, were considered so shameful that they were barely spoken of, even at the time. They were recorded in official documents and private journals, but were part of the public narrative in the same way. Furthermore, the victims of this execution remain nameless and faceless to us. Unlike the accused in Salem, whose stories and families have been researched and documented, these individuals are lost to history. They exist only as statistics in a governor's journal, their personal stories, their fears, and the circumstances that led to their confessions all erased by time. They are the forgotten victims of a legal and religious system that valued communal purity over individual lives. Their story is uncomfortable. It doesn't fit neatly into the heroic narrative of America's founding. It forces us to confront the harsh realities of the past and the terrifying power of ideology, but their story is crucial. It reminds us that the path to a more just and humane society is a long one, and it's paved with the forgotten stories of those who suffered under earlier, more brutal forms of justice. It shows how fear of the unknown, fear of divine punishment, fear of social collapse, can lead a community to commit terrible acts in the name of righteousness. Reflecting on America's first mass execution isn't about judging the past by today's standards. It's about understanding the forces that shaped our world. It's a sobering reminder that justice is not a fixed point but an evolving concept. The Puritans believed they were acting with divine certainty, yet their actions now strike us as unimaginably cruel. This should make us humble. It should make us question our own certainties and examine the fears that drive our own society. The ghosts of 1648 whisper a timeless warning that the line between order and oppression, between justice and cruelty, can be terrifyingly thin. By remembering these forgotten victims, we honor their humanity and reaffirm our commitment to building a world where fear is never again the ultimate judge. Thank you for joining me on this journey into a darker corner of American history. If you found this story thought-provoking, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the past. Every story, no matter how uncomfortable, has something to teach us. See you next time.